I knew something was wrong the night I realized I was looking forward to my wife's cousin coming over more than I looked forward to going home. It sounds ugly when I say it like that. It probably was. I was 39, living in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago. I worked as a senior operations manager for a logistics company downtown. Long hours. Predictable stress. The kind of job where people called you reliable and steady, and meant it as both a compliment and a warning. I had been married to Maya for 12 years. We had built a calm life. A house with a fenced yard. Sunday grocery trips. A shared calendar stuck to the fridge with color-coded markers. From the outside, nothing was broken. But somewhere along the way, our conversations had become efficient. We discussed bills, schedules, her parents' doctor appointments, my deadlines. We were polite. We were kind. We were tired. Some nights we lay in the same bed, backs almost touching, and I would listen to her breathing and feel like I was across a river. Tessa came to stay with us in early October. She had just ended a long relationship in Seattle and needed a few weeks to reset while she looked for work in Chicago. Maya offered without hesitation. That was who she was. Loyal. Generous. She told me it would be good to have someone else in the house for a while. More energy. The first evening Tessa arrived, she stood in our doorway with 2 suitcases and a tight smile. She hugged Maya for a long time. When she turned to me, she laughed and said she hoped we didn't mind the chaos she was about to bring into our quiet lives. I told her it was fine. That we had plenty of space. I remember noticing that she held eye contact a second longer than necessary. Not flirtatious. Just direct. Like she was trying to read something in me. Over the next few days, the house felt different. Tessa moved through rooms with music playing softly from her phone. She asked questions at dinner that went beyond logistics. She wanted to know how Maya and I met, what I had wanted to be when I was younger, whether I still liked the city the way I did when I first moved here. Maya would answer for both of us sometimes. She would say I had always been practical, that I liked stability. She would laugh and call me predictable in that affectionate way she had. Tessa would look at me and say she didn't think predictable was a bad thing. She said it like she meant something else. One Friday night, Maya had to stay late at the clinic where she worked. It was just Tessa and me at the kitchen island. She had opened a bottle of wine and poured me a glass without asking. She said she hated drinking alone and that I looked like someone who could use a break. I should have gone upstairs. I should have told her I had emails to answer. Instead, I sat down. She told me, in a low, steady voice, that she had spent years trying to be enough for someone who always seemed halfway out the door. She said she got tired of shrinking herself to make a man comfortable. She said she didn't want to feel invisible anymore. I found myself telling her that sometimes I felt invisible in my own house. Not because Maya was cruel. She wasn't. But because somewhere along the way, we had stopped looking at each other the way we used to. Tessa didn't interrupt. She just listened. She said it sounded lonely. She said it softly, like she wasn't judging me, just naming something I hadn't admitted out loud. When Maya came home, we were still at the counter, glasses half empty. Nothing inappropriate. Just talking. Still, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name. Not guilt exactly. Not yet. More like awareness. Over the next week, I started noticing small things. The way Tessa brushed past me in the hallway, close enough that our shoulders touched. The way she laughed at my dry comments, even when they weren't that funny. The way she asked me how my day went and waited for a real answer. One evening, I walked into the living room and found her curled up on the couch in one of my old college sweatshirts Maya had given her. She looked comfortable. At home. She told me she liked how our house felt safe. That word stayed with me. Safe. I had spent years building a safe life. And suddenly, safety felt fragile. The moment that should have warned me came on a Sunday afternoon. Maya had gone to visit her mother. Tessa and I were in the backyard, trying to fix a loose panel on the fence. We were both laughing because neither of us really knew what we were doing. At one point, she stepped closer to show me how to hold the hammer. Her hand wrapped around mine, guiding it. It was an ordinary gesture. Harmless on the surface. But I didn't pull away. I felt the warmth of her palm against my skin. I felt how easily our bodies fit into the same space. She looked up at me, and for a second neither of us said anything. The air felt heavier than it should have. She let go first. She said we were probably overcomplicating a simple fix. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, lying beside my wife, I stared at the ceiling and told myself it was nothing. Just proximity. Just timing. Just a house with too many quiet rooms and not enough honesty in them. But I also knew something had shifted. And I didn't step back. That was the first mistake. I told myself I needed distance. The morning after that moment in the backyard, I left for work earlier than usual. I moved quietly around the kitchen so I wouldn't wake either of them. I poured my coffee, stood there staring at the wall for a few seconds longer than necessary, then walked out. All day, I replayed the way her hand had wrapped around mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some movie scene. It was simple. But it stayed with me. When I got home that evening, the house smelled like garlic and something roasted. Maya was at the stove. Tessa was at the counter, chopping vegetables. They looked comfortable together, laughing about some old family story. For a second, I felt foolish. Like I had imagined the tension. At dinner, Tessa asked about my day. Not just the usual polite version. She wanted details. She said she liked hearing about how things worked behind the scenes, how decisions were made. Maya teased that I would bore her within 5 minutes. Tessa said she didn't think so. She said she liked listening when people talked about something they were good at. I felt that land somewhere deeper than it should have. Over the next week, the three of us fell into a rhythm. Maya worked long shifts. Tessa had interviews and freelance meetings. I came home tired. Some nights all three of us ate together. Some nights it was just Tessa and me, waiting for Maya to get back. One night, Maya texted that she'd be late again. Tessa and I sat at the kitchen island with takeout containers open between us. She said she was nervous about a big interview the next morning. She said she kept second-guessing herself. I told her she didn't seem like someone who doubted much. She laughed and said that was the image she liked to give. Then she admitted she had spent years trying to prove she was enough. She said her ex used to tell her she was too intense, too ambitious, too much. She didn't say it dramatically. Just flat, like a fact. I found myself telling her that sometimes being steady and predictable felt like being invisible. That no one really noticed the man who always showed up and paid the bills and didn't cause trouble. I said it half joking, but she didn't treat it like a joke. She said that kind of steadiness was rare. She said it quietly, looking at me like she meant it. There was a pause after that. Not awkward. Just full. I became more aware of the space between us. The way our knees almost touched under the counter. The way her voice lowered when she talked about something personal. I didn't move away. I didn't move closer either. I just stayed. A few days later, she asked if I could look over her presentation for that interview. Maya was already in bed. We sat in the living room with her laptop open on the coffee table. She walked me through her slides. I gave practical feedback. She listened carefully, nodding. At one point, she leaned back against the couch and said she was glad I was there. She said it felt good to have someone calm in the room when she got anxious. I told her she didn't need me for that. She said maybe she did? Her foot brushed against mine. I wasn't sure if it was an accident. Neither of us moved for a second. Then she shifted slightly, but not far. When she got the job offer 2 days later, she hugged me before she called Maya. It was quick, instinctive. Her arms wrapped around my shoulders, and I felt the press of her body against mine. I hugged her back. A normal hug. That's what I told myself. She pulled away slowly. She said she couldn't have done it without me. I said she would have been fine. But that night, after Maya fell asleep, I lay awake again. I started looking for her in small ways. Listening for her footsteps in the hallway. Noticing what she wore. Wondering if she would be home when I got back. It was subtle, but it was there. The real shift came on a rainy Thursday. The power flickered during a storm and went out for about an hour. Maya had picked up an extra shift. It was just the two of us in the dark, candles lit on the kitchen counter. The house felt smaller somehow, quieter. We sat on the couch, closer than usual because the rest of the room was shadowed. She said storms made her feel restless. I asked why. She said they reminded her that things could change fast, without warning. She asked if I ever thought about change. About whether I was happy. I said I didn't know what happy was supposed to feel like after a decade of marriage. I said I felt responsible. Needed. Steady. But I wasn't sure when I had last felt wanted. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me. Then she said softly that I was wanted. That some people could see me clearly. The air felt charged. I could hear the rain against the windows. I could hear my own breathing. She reached for my hand. This time, it wasn't to guide a hammer or pass a glass. It was deliberate. Her fingers slid into mine and stayed there. She didn't look away. She didn't laugh it off. I knew that was the moment to pull back. I didn't. Instead, I told myself it was just comfort. Just two adults feeling less alone for a minute. I told myself no one was being hurt. Not yet. But as we sat there in the dim light, hands linked, I felt something cross a line that couldn't easily be uncrossed. And I still didn't stop it. The first time we kissed, it felt almost quiet. There was no dramatic build-up. No shouting. Just the kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound in a room. It happened 2 weeks after the storm. By then, something had shifted between us in ways that were hard to deny. We had fallen into private rhythms inside the larger routine of the house. Morning coffee at the same time. Quick looks across the kitchen when Maya wasn't paying attention. Text messages during the day that started out harmless, asking about schedules, then slowly turned into longer conversations. I told myself it was just connection. That I hadn't felt heard like that in years. Maya noticed that Tessa and I got along well. She even said she was glad her cousin and her husband had become friends. She said it made her feel less guilty about working so much. That sentence stayed with me. Less guilty. I began staying up later after Maya went to bed. Tessa would be on the couch with her laptop, legs tucked under her. She would ask if I wanted to watch something. We started sitting closer without commenting on it. Our shoulders touched. Then our thighs. One night, she rested her head against my arm while we watched a show neither of us was paying attention to. I could feel her breathing, slow and steady. I should have stood up. Instead, I shifted slightly so she could settle more comfortably. I told myself that physical closeness didn't automatically mean betrayal. But it was building. About a month after she moved in, Maya had to attend a weekend training in another city. She left early Saturday morning. She kissed me goodbye at the door and asked me to make sure Tessa didn't feel lonely in a new place. The irony of that didn't hit me until later. That afternoon, Tessa and I cleaned the house together. It felt domestic in a way that made my chest tight. Music playing. Windows open. Sunlight on the kitchen floor. We bumped into each other more than necessary. Laughed too easily. By evening, we were sitting at the dining table with a bottle of wine between us. She said she hated the quiet when everyone else had somewhere to be. She said it made her think too much. I asked what she thought about. She said she thought about how easy it was to end up in the wrong life. How you could make one practical decision after another, and wake up 10 years later not recognizing yourself. I didn't answer right away. I felt seen in a way that made me uncomfortable. She asked if I was happy. I said I didn't know. There was a long pause. She said she had tried to ignore what was happening between us. She said she knew it was wrong. She said she didn't want to hurt Maya. But she also said she hadn't felt this kind of pull towards someone in years. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I told her I had been fighting it too. That I kept telling myself it was temporary. Just proximity. But it didn't feel temporary. She reached across the table and took my hand again. This time, there was no pretending it was casual. She stood up slowly and walked around the table. She stopped in front of me. I could see the uncertainty in her face. She wasn't reckless. She was scared. She said we could still stop. I didn't say stop. When she leaned in, the kiss was hesitant at first. Testing. Like we were both waiting for the other to pull away. When neither of us did, it deepened. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. I remember the warmth of her hands on my shoulders. The way I felt both wanted and ashamed at the same time. We broke apart after a few seconds. She whispered that this changed everything. I nodded. I knew it did. We didn't talk about rules. We didn't set boundaries. That was the mistake. Over the next few weeks, the affair took shape in quiet, controlled moments. We weren't reckless in obvious ways. We were careful. Doors locked. Lights dimmed. Late nights when Maya was already asleep or out with friends. It wasn't just physical. That's what made it harder to justify and harder to stop. We talked about fears. Regrets. The versions of ourselves we thought we had lost. She said I made her feel steady in a way that didn't feel boring. I said she made me feel alive in a way that scared me. There were moments when we lay close, skin warm against skin, and the world outside that room felt distant. In those moments, I convinced myself that what we had was real, not just an escape. But every time I walked back into my bedroom and lay beside my wife, the weight returned. Maya remained kind. Unaware. She would rest her head against my chest some nights and tell me about her patience, about the exhaustion she felt. She trusted me without question. Trust is heavy when you're breaking it. 2 months into it, Tessa started looking at me differently. Not just with desire. With expectation. She asked what this was becoming. She said she didn't want to be a secret forever. I told her I didn't know how to untangle my life. I said divorce wasn't simple. I said I needed time. She nodded, but I could see the shift in her. The beginning of doubt. At the same time, something inside me had started to fracture. The excitement was still there. The pull was still strong. But so was the awareness that I was building something on damage. One night, after Maya fell asleep early, I stayed in the living room alone. Tessa had gone out with friends. The house felt too quiet again. I walked into the bedroom and stood there for a moment, watching my wife sleep. The woman who had built a life with me. Who had believed in my steadiness. Who had never questioned my loyalty. For the first time, the question in my head wasn't about what I was missing. It was about what I was destroying. And I didn't yet know which part of me would win. The night everything cracked open wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, which somehow made it worse. It had been almost 3 months since that first kiss. By then, Tessa had moved into her own apartment downtown. On the surface, it looked like a healthy step. More independence. Less suspicion. Maya even helped her shop for furniture one Saturday afternoon. I remember watching the two of them laughing over throw pillows, and feeling like I was standing outside my own life. The affair didn't end when she moved out. It just became scheduled. I started staying late at work more often. I said there were supply chain issues. Emergency calls. A new client. Sometimes there were. Sometimes there weren't. I would drive to her apartment after dark. The first few times, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from fear of getting caught. From the weight of what I was choosing. Inside her place, it felt different from my house. Smaller. More temporary. There were boxes still stacked near the hallway. A lamp that flickered if you tapped it. The kind of space that feels like it belongs to someone starting over. With her, I felt less like a husband and more like a man without a history. But history doesn't disappear just because you close the door. That night, she was quiet. We had eaten takeout on the floor because she still hadn't bought a dining table. Usually, she would talk about her day, about office politics, about something funny someone said. That night she kept circling back to the same question. She said she needed to know where this was going. I told her I cared about her. That what we had wasn't just physical. That I hadn't felt understood like this in years. All of that was true. She listened, then asked if I was going to leave my wife. I didn't answer right away. Silence can be louder than words. She said she didn't want to be someone's secret. She said she respected herself too much for that. She said she had already lost one long relationship by pretending things were fine when they weren't. I felt cornered, even though she wasn't attacking me. She was just asking for clarity. I told her divorce wasn't simple. That Maya and I had built a life. That there were finances, family, shared history. I said I needed time to figure out what I wanted. She asked how much time? I didn't know. That was when I saw it. The shift from excitement to exhaustion in her eyes. She stood up and walked to the window. She said she had convinced herself that I would choose her. That eventually I would wake up and realize I deserved more than a quiet, distant marriage. I felt something twist inside me at the way she described my marriage. Quiet. Distant. Those words had once come from my own mouth. Now they sounded different. I told her my marriage wasn't a prison. That Maya wasn't cruel or cold. She was just tired. And maybe I had been too. I admitted that I had let things go silent instead of fixing them. Tessa turned back toward me and asked if I loved my wife. It should have been a simple answer. Instead, I said I didn't know what love looked like after 12 years. She shook her head slightly and said that sounded like a man who didn't want to admit the truth. The truth, though, was more complicated than either of us wanted. That night, when I drove home, the house lights were still on. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table, paperwork spread in front of her. She looked up when I walked in and smiled in that small, familiar way. She said she had waited up to show me something. She had finally applied for a promotion at the clinic. She looked nervous and proud at the same time. I sat down across from her. She slid the papers toward me. She said she had almost talked herself out of it, but then she remembered how I always told her she deserved more responsibility. I didn't remember saying that. But I must have. She said she believed me when I told her she was capable. There it was again. Belief. I looked at her hands, the way they rested on the table. The same hands that had held mine in hospital waiting rooms. The same hands that had helped me pack when I first moved into this house. I felt something settle in my chest. Not excitement. Not intensity. Stability. That night, lying beside her, I didn't stare at the ceiling. I turned toward her. She shifted in her sleep and instinctively moved closer, her arm draping across my waist. It was such a small, unconscious gesture. But it felt honest. The next evening, I went to Tessa's apartment again. I knew I needed to say something clear. She opened the door and immediately asked if I had decided. I told her I couldn't keep living split in two. I said what we had was real, but it was built in a shadow. I said I couldn't leave my wife. Not because of money or fear. But because somewhere along the way, I had confused restlessness with absence. I told her I still loved Maya. Maybe not in the loud, urgent way I felt with Tessa. But in a deeper way. A way that had survived years, arguments, ordinary days. She didn't cry. She just stood very still. She said she had known this might happen. She said she didn't regret what we had, but she couldn't continue knowing she was second to someone who hadn't even chosen her. I apologized. The word felt thin. She said she hoped I would be honest with myself from now on. She said if I stayed in my marriage, I had to actually be in it. I nodded. I knew she was right. When I left her apartment that night, it felt different from all the other times. No anticipation. No secret thrill. Just a quiet ending. Driving home, I realized something that scared me more than the affair itself. I had been searching for intensity because I thought it meant love. But what I was about to lose wasn't intensity. It was the woman who had built a life with me, steady and flawed and real. And for the first time in months, I knew which direction I needed to walk. Ending it with Tessa didn't bring relief the way I thought it would. It brought silence. For a few days, I moved through the house carefully. I answered Maya's questions. I went to work. I came home on time. On the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything felt rearranged. Tessa texted once, a short message saying she hoped I meant what I said about choosing my marriage. I replied that I did. She didn't answer after that. I expected to feel clean, like I had stepped back from a cliff. Instead, I felt exposed. I had broken something, even if no one else knew yet. About a week later, Maya came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read emails on my phone. She stood there for a moment, watching me. I could feel it. She asked if something was wrong. I said no too quickly. She didn't push. She just nodded and started talking about her promotion. She had been shortlisted. There would be a formal interview next month. She looked hopeful in a way I hadn't seen in a while. That hope made it harder. Over the next few days, she kept studying in the evenings. I would sit beside her on the couch while she reviewed notes. Sometimes she would ask me to quiz her. I did. I listened to her answers. I corrected small details. There was something grounding about it. But guilt has a way of leaking into ordinary moments. One night, she reached for my phone to check the time while hers was charging upstairs. My body tensed before I could stop it. She noticed. She asked why I reacted like that. I told her it was nothing. Just habit. She held my gaze a little longer than usual. Then she handed the phone back. Later that week, she asked directly if I was happy. The question landed differently than when Tessa had asked it. I didn't deflect this time. I told her I had felt distant. That I hadn't known how to say it without sounding ungrateful. I admitted I had been restless. That sometimes I felt like we were roommates managing a house instead of partners. She listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. Then she said she had felt it too. She said she thought it was just the stress of work and life. She said she kept assuming we would reconnect once things slowed down. Things never really slow down. There was a long pause. I knew that was the moment to either stay half honest or be fully honest. I didn't confess everything. I couldn't yet. But I told her I had crossed an emotional line with someone. That I had let myself get too close. That it had scared me enough to pull back. Her face went still. She asked if it was over. I said yes. She asked if it had been physical. Silence stretched between us. I nodded. That was the hardest part. Watching the realization move across her face. She didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. She just leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they looked older. She asked if it was Tessa. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She let out a slow breath and said she felt stupid for not seeing it. I tried to explain that it wasn't about something she lacked. That it had been about my own confusion, my own need for something intense and different. The words sounded hollow even to me. She stood up and walked to the bedroom without saying anything else. That night, she slept facing the other direction. The next morning, she told me she needed space to think. She didn't leave the house. She just moved differently in it. Conversations became practical again. Polite. But colder. I offered counseling. She said she would consider it. For the first time, I felt what it meant to possibly lose her. There was no thrill in that. No rush. Just fear. A few days later, she came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. She said she had called a therapist. We had an appointment the following week. She said if we were going to stay married, it couldn't be the version we had been living. It had to be honest. Even if honesty was uncomfortable. I told her I agreed. The therapy sessions were brutal in a quiet way. We sat on opposite ends of a couch in a small office with soft lighting. The therapist asked simple questions that felt impossible to answer. Why had I stepped outside the marriage instead of addressing the distance inside it? What had I been afraid to say? I admitted I had confused calm with emptiness. That I had mistaken stability for lack of passion. That I had been chasing a feeling instead of fixing what I already had. Maya admitted she had poured herself into work to avoid noticing how far apart we had drifted. She said she assumed we were solid because we weren't fighting. Not fighting isn't the same as connecting. There were nights when she cried quietly in the bathroom. I heard it through the door and hated myself. There were mornings when she made coffee for both of us anyway. That steadiness, even in pain, changed something in me. Gradually, we started rebuilding in small ways. We scheduled time that wasn't about logistics. We talked without phones in our hands. We said things that felt awkward but necessary. I stopped staying late at work without reason. I stopped guarding my phone like it held secrets. Tessa and I had no contact after that last message. I heard through Maya's family that she was focusing on her job, that she seemed fine. I didn't ask for more details. About 2 months after the confession, Maya got the promotion. When she told me, she was smiling again. Not the automatic polite smile. A real one. She said she had doubted herself, but she pushed through. I hugged her tightly. I told her I was proud of her. And this time, there was no divided loyalty inside me. Trust didn't come back all at once. It came in pieces. In small permissions. In shared laughter that felt less forced. One night, months later, we were sitting on the porch after dinner. The air was cool. The street was quiet. She leaned her head against my shoulder. She said she didn't know if she would ever fully forget what happened. But she believed people could choose better after choosing wrong. I told her I was choosing her. Not out of obligation. Not out of fear. But because I finally understood what I had almost thrown away. And for the first time in a long time, the house felt safe again. The real work started after the shock faded. It is one thing to confess. It is another thing to live with what you confessed. For a while, Maya and I moved carefully around each other, like we were learning the shape of the same room again. We kept going to therapy. Some sessions were quiet. Some were tense. The therapist kept bringing us back to one idea, that rebuilding trust was not about grand gestures, it was about consistent behavior over time. So I focused on time. I came home when I said I would. I answered questions without defensiveness. I let her look at my phone without flinching. I didn't offer it dramatically. I just stopped hiding it. There were still moments when something small would trigger her. A late notification. A mention of Tessa's name in a family message. When that happened, I didn't argue. I didn't say she was overreacting. I sat with it. I let her be angry. One night she asked me why I had really ended it. I told her the truth as clearly as I could. I said I realized that intensity wasn't the same as depth. That what I felt with Tessa was sharp and urgent, but what I had built with Maya was layered and rooted. I said I had confused novelty with meaning. She listened without interrupting. Then she said she needed to know that I wasn't staying out of guilt. I told her guilt had opened my eyes, but it wasn't what was keeping me there. What was keeping me there was the memory of who we had been before we went quiet, and the belief that we could find that again if we were willing to be uncomfortable. Slowly, we started doing small things differently. We went out to dinner on weeknights instead of eating in silence at the island. We walked around the neighborhood after work, even when we were tired. We asked each other questions that weren't about logistics. There were awkward pauses at first. We had to relearn each other. I started telling her when I felt restless instead of burying it. She started telling me when she felt overwhelmed instead of pretending she was fine. One Saturday afternoon, months after everything had come out, we cleaned the garage together. It sounds simple, but it felt symbolic. We sorted through boxes we hadn't opened in years. Old photos. Cards from our wedding. Receipts from our first apartment. At one point, she found a picture of us on a beach in Florida, taken during our second year of marriage. We were sunburned and laughing at something off camera. She held the photo for a long time. She said she missed how easy we used to be. I told her I did too. Then she said maybe we weren't supposed to go back to that version. Maybe we were supposed to build a new one. That stuck with me. Around that time, Tessa called Maya. I wasn't in the room, but I knew the call was happening. I could hear Maya's voice through the bedroom door. Calm. Controlled. After she hung up, she came out and told me Tessa had apologized. She said Tessa took responsibility for her part. She said she was focusing on her career and thinking about moving to another city. I didn't ask for details. I just nodded. Maya said she appreciated that Tessa called, but it didn't change what had happened. She said the real work was here, not there. She was right. The next big step came quietly. About a year after the affair ended, we decided to take a short trip together. Just the two of us. A small lake house in Michigan for a long weekend. No family. No friends. No work emails. The first night there felt strange. Like we were two people on a cautious first date. But by the second day, something softened. We cooked together. We sat by the water in the late afternoon and talked about things we hadn't said out loud in years. Dreams we had shelved. Fears we had avoided. That night, when we went to bed, there was no hesitation. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about competing with a memory. It was about choosing each other in the present. Afterward, we lay there quietly. She traced small circles on my chest the way she used to. I realized how much I had missed that kind of quiet closeness. On the drive back home, she said she felt hopeful. Not naive. Not blind. Hopeful. Over time, the house felt lighter. Not perfect. We still had disagreements. We still got tired. But there was more honesty in the air. I learned that commitment is not a single promise made once. It is a series of daily decisions, especially after you have proven you are capable of making the wrong one. When Maya's promotion became official, she invited her team over for dinner. I moved through the evening with a sense of pride that had nothing to do with ego. I watched her lead conversations, confident and assured. I realized that for years I had underestimated her strength. Later that night, after everyone left and the dishes were done, she leaned against the counter and looked at me. She said she wasn't grateful for the affair. But she was grateful that it forced us to stop pretending. I told her I would spend the rest of my life earning back what I had taken for granted. She didn't respond with a grand speech. She just reached for my hand. And this time, when our fingers linked, there was no shadow behind it. The idea of renewing our vows wasn't mine. It was Maya's. It came up on a quiet Sunday morning, almost 2 years after everything had unraveled and slowly come back together. We were sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, sunlight coming in through the blinds. She said she had been thinking about how much had changed, and how we never really marked it. She said our original wedding felt like it belonged to two people who had no idea what marriage would actually demand. I understood what she meant. Our first ceremony had been big. Hotel ballroom. Extended family. Speeches that went on too long. We had smiled through the whole thing, young and certain. This time, she said she wanted something small. Intentional. Not to erase what happened, but to acknowledge that we stayed. I asked her if she was sure. She said she didn't want a perfect story. She wanted an honest one. So we planned something simple. Just immediate family and a few close friends. A small outdoor space near the lake where we had taken that trip. Early fall again, almost the same season when everything had first started to shift years before. I remember standing there that afternoon, feeling a different kind of nervous. Not the fear of losing her. Not the thrill of something forbidden. Just the weight of meaning. When Maya walked toward me, she wasn't dressed like a bride from a magazine. Just a simple cream dress. Her hair down. She looked steady. Our family sat in folding chairs. There was no big entrance. No dramatic music. Just the sound of wind moving through trees. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't try to be poetic. I told the truth. I said I had once mistaken silence for safety and excitement for love. I said I had learned that love is not measured by how intense it feels in a moment, but by how willing you are to stay and do the work when it is hard. I admitted that I had hurt her. That I would never be proud of that part of our story. But I said I was proud of what we chose afterward. She listened without looking away. When she spoke, her voice was steady. She said she had learned that forgiveness is not weakness. That choosing to rebuild had been the hardest decision she ever made. She said she didn't stay because she was afraid to leave. She stayed because she believed we were capable of more honesty than we had been living. There were no dramatic tears. Just quiet emotion. When we exchanged rings again, they were the same ones from our first wedding. Slightly worn now. Scratched in places. That felt right. After the short ceremony, we shared a meal at a long wooden table outside. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Someone made a light joke about second chances. I caught Maya watching me from across the table at one point. Not checking. Not doubting. Just watching. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left, and the sky had turned darker, we walked down toward the water together. The same lake where we had talked about building something new. She slipped her hand into mine without hesitation. She said she knew some people would never fully understand why she stayed. She said she didn't need them to. I told her I didn't need anyone else's approval either. The real proof wasn't in a ceremony. It was in the ordinary days that followed. Going back home after that weekend didn't feel like returning to routine. It felt like returning to something chosen. There were still moments when I caught a flicker of pain in her eyes if the past came up. There were still moments when I felt the sting of regret. But those moments didn't define us anymore. We had done something harder than walking away. We had stayed. And not out of habit. Out of decision. And standing there by the lake that night, I understood that love isn't about never failing. It's about what you do after you do. If you had asked me years ago what almost ended my marriage, I probably would have blamed distance. Or routine. Or stress. Now I know it was silence. Not the quiet of a peaceful house, The quiet of things left unsaid. The kind where two people assume the other one understands, and slowly stop explaining themselves. I used to think being a good husband meant being steady. Paying bills on time. Not causing problems. Showing up physically even when I had already checked out emotionally. I wore reliability like armor and called it love. But steadiness without honesty becomes distance. And distance, if you don't name it, invites someone else to step into the gap. I don't say that to excuse what I did. There was no excuse. I made a choice. More than once. I crossed lines I knew were there. I let attention and intensity feel like validation instead of asking myself why I needed that validation in the first place. What I learned is uncomfortable. Desire can feel urgent. It can feel alive. It can make you believe you are finally being seen. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. Intimacy is built slowly, through years of shared mornings and arguments and forgiveness. I almost traded something rooted for something new. And new always feels powerful at first. What saved my marriage wasn't a dramatic promise. It was humility. Sitting in a therapist's office and admitting that I had chosen escape instead of conversation. Listening to my wife describe how betrayal reshaped her sense of safety. Staying in the room when it would have been easier to defend myself. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a single moment. It is a process. It is choosing, over and over, not to weaponize the past while also not pretending it never happened. Maya didn't stay because she was weak. She stayed because she believed that broken things can be rebuilt if both people are willing to strip them down to the foundation. I had to relearn what commitment meant. It is not just loyalty when things are easy. It is discipline when things are quiet. It is asking hard questions before someone else does. It is saying, I feel distant, before you start looking for closeness in the wrong place. If there is one thing I would tell anyone who feels restless in their marriage, it is this: restlessness is a signal, not a solution. Talk sooner. Be honest sooner. Don't wait until someone else makes you feel seen. The person beside you might be waiting for the same courage. Our story is not perfect. It never will be. There is a chapter one wish I could erase. But there is also a chapter where we faced it directly and decided not to let it define us. When I look at Maya now, I don't see the version of her from our first wedding. I see the woman who stayed, who demanded better from me, and who rebuilt something stronger than what we started with. And when she looks at me, I know she sees the man who failed, but also the man who chose to do better afterward. That choice, repeated over time, is what love looks like to me now. Not intensity. Not secrecy. Not escape. Just two people, imperfect and honest, deciding every day to remain in the same room and speak,